Move every dollar out of our joint accounts tomorrow morning, my husband whispered to me 3 days before he died. And Helen, don't tell anyone I ask you to do it. At the time, I thought the medication was making him anxious. 72 hours later, I realized it was the most important thing Robert Carter had ever said to me. I'm 72 years old, and after 48 years of marriage, I believe there were no secrets left between my husband and me. We had built a life together in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. We raised a son, paid off a mortgage, celebrated anniversaries, welcomed grandchildren, and survived every challenge that life placed in our path. Robert had always been the calm one, the steady one, the kind of man who double-checked smoke detectors, balanced every bank statement to the penny, and kept every important document neatly filed in labeled folders. That was why his request felt so strange. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the blinds of his hospital room, painting thin golden lines across the blanket covering his legs. He looked tired, much thinner than he had only a month earlier, but his blue eyes were alert, focused, watching the door, making sure we were alone. "Helen," he said quietly, "promise me you'll do exactly what I'm about to tell you." I pulled my chair closer to his bed and took his hand. It felt cool and fragile in mine. "Of course," I said. "What is it?" He swallowed slowly before speaking again. "Tomorrow morning, transfer everything out of our joint accounts. Every checking account, every savings account. Move it all." I stared at him. "Why?" A shadow crossed his face. Not fear exactly. Something deeper. Something that made my stomach tighten. "I can't explain right now. Robert, if something is wrong, tell me." He squeezed my hand surprisingly hard. "Just trust me." For nearly 5 decades, I had trusted him with every important decision in our lives. But this felt different. This felt urgent. "Does this have something to do with Jason?" I asked. Our son had been visiting more frequently during Robert's illness. So had his wife, Brittany. Robert looked toward the door again, before returning his gaze to me. "Just do it," he said softly. "And don't tell anyone." The next morning I drove to the bank. The October air was cool, and orange leaves drifted across the parking lot as I sat behind the steering wheel trying to convince myself I wasn't making a terrible mistake. The bank manager helped me move the funds into accounts Robert had established years earlier under a trust structure I barely understood. By noon, every dollar had been transferred. I expected to feel relieved. Instead, I felt guilty, as though I had done something behind my family's back. That evening, Brittany stopped by the house carrying homemade soup. She smiled warmly and asked how Robert was feeling. Jason called twice before dinner. My granddaughter sent a sweet text message filled with heart emojis. Everything seemed normal, perfectly normal. But once you've spent nearly 50 years married to someone, you learn to recognize the moments when they see something you don't. And that night, as I sat beside Robert's hospital bed listening to the soft hum of medical equipment, I couldn't shake the feeling that my husband had just moved the first piece in a game I didn't yet understand. 3 days later, Robert was gone. And before the week was over, someone in my family would reveal exactly why he had warned me to move every penny. The house felt impossibly quiet after the funeral. For 48 years, Robert had filled every room with a steady presence that I rarely noticed until it was gone. Now, even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed louder. I spent the first few days moving through familiar routines without thinking. I made coffee for 1 instead of 2. I folded laundry that no longer included his flannel shirts. I watered the small rose garden outside the kitchen window because Robert always reminded me that roses needed consistency, even when life did not. Friends from church dropped off casseroles. Neighbors stopped by with sympathy cards. Everyone said the same things. They told me Robert had been a wonderful man. They told me he had lived a good life. They told me to call if I needed anything. I thanked them all with a smile. What I did not tell anyone was that Robert's final warning echoed in my mind every hour of the day. On Friday morning, Brittany arrived carrying a bakery box filled with muffins. She hugged me tightly and insisted she wanted to help with anything I needed. Her voice was warm. Her smile seemed genuine. Still, Something felt different now. Maybe it was because I could not stop thinking about Robert looking toward the hospital room door before giving me those instructions. Maybe grief was making me suspicious. Or maybe I was finally noticing things I had overlooked before. As Brittany arranged muffins on a plate, her eyes drifted toward the hallway where Robert kept his office. "Have you started organizing any of his paperwork yet?" she asked casually. I shook my head. "Not yet. There is probably a lot to go through," she said. "Bank records, investment accounts, insurance documents." She spoke carefully, almost as if she had rehearsed the conversation beforehand. I told myself she was only trying to be helpful. Yet the question lingered with me long after she left. The next day, Jason came by. He sat across from me at the dining room table where he had eaten thousands of family meals growing up. He looked tired and distracted. We talked about the funeral, about work, about the grandchildren. Then, almost as an afterthought, he asked whether I had access to all of the financial accounts. The question landed heavily. It was the second time in 2 days someone had brought up money. I answered carefully and changed the subject. That evening I opened an old photo album. Page after page showed the life Robert and I had built together. Family vacations, birthday parties, graduation ceremonies, smiling faces frozen in time. As I turned another page, a memory surfaced. About 6 months earlier, I had walked into the kitchen unexpectedly and found Robert staring at Brittany after she had left a family gathering. His expression had been thoughtful, concerned even. When I asked what was wrong, he had simply said, "Sometimes people reveal more than they realize." At the time, I had not understood what he meant. Sitting alone in the quiet house, I suddenly wondered if he had been trying to tell me something all along. The following Tuesday, rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows as I began sorting through some of Robert's belongings. I was not looking for answers. At least that is what I told myself. Grief has a strange way of disguising curiosity as responsibility. I carried a cardboard box from his office into the dining room and started organizing papers into neat piles. Tax records, utility bills, warranty information for appliances we no longer owned. Robert had always been meticulous. Every document had a place. Every place had a label. Hours passed before I noticed something unusual. Inside the bottom drawer of his desk sat a small wooden box I had never seen before. It was not hidden exactly, but it certainly was not displayed. The box contained old photographs, a few military keepsakes from his father, and a brass key attached to a faded blue tag. Written on the tag in Robert's careful handwriting were 3 simple words. "For Helen only." I stared at the key for several seconds. My pulse quickened. Robert had never mentioned it. I turned it over in my hand. It felt heavier than it looked. That evening I drove to the local branch of the bank where we had done business for decades. The same manager who had helped me transfer the funds recognized me immediately. When I showed her the key, her expression changed. "This belongs to a safe deposit box," she said. "Would you like me to check our records?" A few minutes later she returned with a folder. The box had been rented by Robert more than a year earlier. Only his name appeared on the paperwork, but there was an authorization letter allowing me access in the event of his death. My hands trembled slightly as she escorted me to the vault. The room was quiet and cool. Row after row of metal boxes lined the walls. When she slid the container onto the small viewing table and left me alone, I hesitated before opening it. Inside were several sealed envelopes, a flash drive, and a thick folder secured with a rubber band. On top sat a handwritten note. "Helen, if you are reading this, it means I ran out of time." I closed my eyes for a moment. Even seeing his handwriting felt like hearing his voice. Slowly, I unfolded the note. Robert explained that he had spent the last 14 months documenting information he believed I might need one day. He urged me not to panic and not to confront anyone until I had reviewed everything. Most importantly, he warned me to trust actions rather than words. As I reached for the folder beneath the note, a single sheet of paper slipped free and landed on the table. It was a photocopy of a bank statement. Several transactions had been highlighted in yellow. The account number was unfamiliar, but one detail immediately caught my attention. The authorized contact listed on the account was Brittany Carter. Beneath that was a note written by Robert himself. This is where the trail begins. I took the folder home and placed it on the dining room table where Robert and I had shared thousands of meals over the years. Outside, the sky was turning gray as evening settled across the neighborhood. For a long time, I simply stared at the documents without opening them. Part of me was afraid of what I might find. Another part already suspected that Robert had not spent 14 months gathering information without a reason. Eventually, I poured myself a cup of coffee and began reading. The highlighted bank statement was only the beginning. Behind it were copies of financial records, property filings, and printed email confirmations. Robert had organized everything chronologically. Every document was marked with dates and handwritten notes in the margins. The deeper I went, the more uneasy I became. Several transactions involved accounts I had never seen before. The amounts were not enormous individually, often only a few $1,000s at a time, but over many months they added up to a significant sum. What disturbed me even more was the pattern. Whenever money moved, Brittany's name seemed to appear somewhere nearby. Sometimes she was listed as a contact. Sometimes she appeared in related correspondence. Sometimes there was only a note from Robert asking a question he had not yet answered. Around 9 o'clock that evening, my phone rang. It was Brittany. Her voice sounded cheerful. She asked how I was doing and whether I needed groceries or help around the house. Then, after a few minutes of small talk, she casually shifted the conversation. "Have you started sorting through Robert's financial paperwork yet?" she asked. The question sent a chill through me. I glanced down at the stack of documents, sitting inches away. "Not really," I replied. "There is still so much to do." "That makes sense," she said quickly. "Those things can be overwhelming." Her tone remained pleasant, but I noticed something underneath it now. Not concern. Interest. Careful interest. After we hung up, I returned to the folder. Near the bottom, I found a sealed envelope labeled open after reviewing everything else. Inside was another letter from Robert. This one was shorter. "Helen, if Brittany begins asking unusual questions about accounts, property records, or legal documents, pay attention. Do not argue. Do not accuse. Just observe. People reveal their intentions when they believe nobody is watching." I read that sentence 3 times. Suddenly, dozens of small memories began connecting in my mind. Family dinners where Brittany steered conversations toward investments. Holiday gatherings where she seemed unusually curious about ownership records and estate planning. Comments I had dismissed as harmless curiosity. Looking back now, they felt different. Near midnight, I reached the final section of the folder. Tucked between 2 financial reports was a photograph. It showed Brittany entering a downtown office building. On the back, Robert had written a date and a single sentence. She told everyone she was visiting a friend that afternoon. She was actually meeting with someone who knew exactly how much our family was worth. I sat back in my chair and stared at those words. For the first time since Robert's funeral, I realized that whatever he had uncovered was much larger than a simple misunderstanding. The next morning, I called attorney Michael Reed. Robert had mentioned him several times over the years, and his business card was clipped to one of the folders inside the safe deposit box. Michael agreed to meet me that afternoon. His office occupied the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown, overlooking a small park where children played beneath bright autumn trees. When I arrived, he greeted me warmly and offered coffee before leading me into a conference room. The moment I placed Robert's documents on the table, his expression grew serious. He recognized the folder immediately. "I was wondering when you would find this," he said quietly. Those words sent a ripple of unease through me. Michael explained that Robert had consulted him several times during the previous year. Not because he intended to change his estate plan, but because he wanted to protect it. According to Michael, Robert had become concerned after noticing unusual patterns involving family finances and certain conversations that did not seem accidental. He never rushed to conclusions. That was not his nature. Instead, he documented everything. He verified facts. He gathered records. He waited. Michael opened one of the files and slid several pages across the table. They contained notes from meetings Robert had attended, along with timelines connecting various financial inquiries made by Brittany. None of the actions alone appeared alarming. Together, however, they painted a troubling picture. Over many months, Brittany had repeatedly sought information about account balances, property valuations, retirement funds, and inheritance structures. Often she framed her questions as concern for the family. Sometimes she claimed she wanted to help Jason plan for the future. Yet the frequency stood out. Robert believed she was building a map, Michael said. A map of everything your family owned. I stared at the pages in silence. Part of me wanted to defend her. After all, Brittany had been part of our family for more than a decade. I had celebrated birthdays with her, watched her children grow, shared holidays and traditions. But another part of me remembered Robert's final instructions. Trust actions rather than words. Before I left, Michael handed me another sealed envelope. This one had been left specifically in his care. Robert asked me to give this to you only after you reviewed the material in the safe deposit box, he explained. I waited until I returned home before opening it. Inside was a short, handwritten letter. Helen, if you have reached this point, then you know I was not imagining things. There is one more place you need to look. Follow the money, not the explanations. The truth hides in records, not conversations. Attached to the letter was a list of account numbers and transaction dates. As I studied them that evening, one detail immediately stood out. Several transfers connected back to the same unfamiliar account that appeared in the documents from the safe deposit box. An account associated with Brittany. For months, Robert had been following that trail. Now, whether I wanted to or not, I realized I was following it too. Over the next several days, I followed the trail exactly as Robert had instructed. Not through conversations. Not through assumptions. Through records. Every morning I sat at the dining room table with a notebook, a calculator, and the growing stack of documents Robert had left behind. The more I examined the transactions, the clearer the pattern became. Money had not disappeared from our accounts. That was never the issue. Instead, someone had been gathering information, preparing for future access, and positioning themselves to move quickly when the opportunity arrived. Several inquiries had been made regarding account structures, beneficiary designations, and ownership details. The requests stretched back more than a year. Most had been harmless on the surface. Together, they revealed intent. One afternoon, I visited a financial institution listed in Robert's notes. I was not asking for confidential information. I simply wanted clarification regarding several transaction references. The employer reviewed the records available to me and explained the process used when individuals attempted to update account permissions or request ownership information. As she spoke, another memory surfaced. About 8 months earlier, Brittany had volunteered to help organize family paperwork after a holiday gathering. At the time, I thought she was being thoughtful. Now I remembered how interested she had been in filing cabinets, account folders, and document storage locations. Details I had ignored suddenly felt important. That evening, Jason called. His voice sounded unusually tense. He asked whether I had begun making decisions about the house. The question surprised me. Robert had been gone only a short time. I told him I was focusing on settling into a new routine before making any major choices. There was a pause on the line. Then, he mentioned that Brittany had been researching retirement communities and thought it might be easier for me to downsize. Easier. The word lingered long after the call ended. I looked around the living room. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, every shelf carried memories built across nearly 5 decades. Nobody had discussed moving before. Not once. Yet now the subject appeared unexpectedly. The next morning, while reviewing another section of Robert's files, I found a timeline he had created. Dates, notes, observations. Near the bottom, one entry caught my attention. Brittany becomes impatient whenever plans are delayed. Watch for pressure after I am gone. I sat quietly for several minutes. Robert had not written those words casually. He had written them because he expected something to happen. 2 days later, that prediction began proving itself correct. Brittany arrived without notice carrying coffee and pastries. She smiled warmly and spoke kindly, But within 20 minutes, the conversation shifted toward legal matters, property decisions, and future arrangements. She suggested creating a family meeting to discuss assets and long-term plans. As she spoke, I simply listened. I nodded. I asked harmless questions. I revealed nothing. For the first time, I understood why Robert had spent so long gathering information instead of confronting anyone. When people believe they are close to getting what they want, they often reveal far more than they intended. The family meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday afternoon. Brittany suggested it herself, presenting the idea as a way for everyone to support me during a difficult transition. Her exact words were thoughtful and polished. She said families should work together. She said planning ahead prevented confusion. She said Robert would have wanted everyone on the same page. I agreed immediately. That seemed to surprise her. Over the next few days, I played the role she expected. I asked simple questions. I appeared uncertain about financial matters. I even mentioned feeling overwhelmed by all the paperwork Robert had left behind. Each time I did, Brittany seemed to relax a little more. The confidence in her voice grew stronger. The caution I had noticed before slowly disappeared. On Thursday evening, she stopped by again. We sat at the kitchen table drinking tea, while rain tapped softly against the windows. She spoke at length about how difficult it must be for me to manage such a large house alone. She mentioned maintenance costs, property taxes, yard work, utility bills. Every concern sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they felt rehearsed. At one point, she leaned forward and placed her hand gently on mine. "You deserve a simpler life, Helen," she said. "Somewhere comfortable. Somewhere you do not have to worry about all these responsibilities." I smiled politely. Inside, I remembered Robert's note. "Watch for pressure after I am gone." The next morning, I received an unexpected call from attorney Michael Reed. He had reviewed several additional records connected to the documents Robert collected. One detail stood out. Approximately 3 months earlier, someone had contacted a financial consultant requesting general information about transferring family assets after the death of a spouse. The request itself was not unusual. What caught Michael's attention was the timing and persistence. Multiple follow-up inquiries had been made over the following weeks. All roads seemed to lead back to the same circle of conversations Robert had been tracking. That afternoon, while organizing another box from Robert's office, I found a small notebook tucked between 2 binders. Most of the pages contained ordinary reminders and household notes. Then I reached an entry written only 6 weeks before his death. Sometimes patience reveals more than confrontation ever could. People eventually tell you exactly who they are. You simply have to be quiet long enough to hear it. I closed the notebook and sat in silence. Robert had spent months observing, listening, waiting. Now, I understood why. Saturday finally arrived. Jason and Brittany came together. Both were unusually upbeat. They carried folders and notepads. Brittany even brought a tray of cookies from a local bakery. The atmosphere felt strangely professional for a family gathering. We settled around the dining room table, the same table where birthdays had been celebrated and holiday meals shared for decades. After a few minutes of casual conversation, Brittany opened her folder. Her smile remained warm. Her tone remained friendly. But as she began outlining suggestions for my future, I noticed something important. For the first time, she was no longer speaking as though possibilities were being discussed. She was speaking as though decisions had already been made. For the next hour, I listened far more than I spoke. Brittany had prepared charts, printed estimates, and handwritten notes outlining what she called practical next steps. She discussed selling the house. She discussed simplifying my finances. She discussed creating a structure that would make future decisions easier for the family. Each suggestion sounded reasonable when viewed alone. Together, they formed a roadmap leading away from everything Robert and I had spent nearly 5 decades building. Jason sat beside her, nodding occasionally. He seemed uncomfortable at times, but he never interrupted. He never questioned the pace of the conversation. Most importantly, he never asked what I wanted. Eventually, Brittany slid a folder across the table toward me. "This is just preliminary information," she said with a reassuring smile. "Nothing has to happen immediately. I opened the folder. Inside were property valuation reports, housing options, and several documents outlining asset management strategies. One page immediately caught my attention: a projected timeline. According to the document, major decisions regarding the house, financial accounts, and long-term arrangements could begin within 60 days. 60 days. Robert had not even been gone a month. I looked up slowly. Brittany maintained her warm expression. "We're only trying to help," she said. I nodded politely and closed the folder. Then I asked a simple question. "Who prepared all of this?" For the first time that afternoon, she hesitated. Only briefly. "A consultant I know," she replied. "Someone experienced with family transitions." The answer sounded practiced. Later that evening, after they left, I reviewed the documents more carefully. Tucked between 2 pages was a business card. The consultant's name immediately caught my attention because I had seen it before. I hurried to Robert's files and searched through the material from the safe deposit box. After several minutes, I found it. The same name appeared in one of Robert's notes connected to the photograph from the downtown office building. The same consultant. The same individual Brittany had apparently been speaking with months earlier. I sat back in my chair and stared at the matching names. Robert had been right. The pieces were connecting exactly as he predicted. The following morning I met with Michael Reed again. When I showed him the documents from the family meeting, he studied them carefully before setting them aside. His expression remained calm, but I could see recognition in his eyes. "This is moving faster than I expected," he said. He then opened a file from his desk and handed me a document I had never seen before. It was dated 8 months earlier. According to the notes attached, someone had attempted to gather detailed information about future inheritance distributions connected to our estate structure. The inquiry had not succeeded, but it had been documented. I looked at the name associated with the request. My heart sank. It was not Brittany. It was Jason. For several seconds, I could not speak. Michael leaned forward gently. "Helen, I think your husband suspected something important. He did not believe Brittany was acting alone." As I drove home that afternoon, the autumn sunlight seemed colder than before. For weeks I had been following a trail that pointed toward one person. Now, for the first time, I had to consider the possibility that Robert's greatest concern had never been about my daughter-in-law alone. 3 days later, Michael arranged a meeting at his office. Jason and Brittany arrived together, confident and relaxed. Brittany carried the same folder she had brought to my house. Jason barely looked at me. As we settled around the conference table, I noticed how certain they seemed. It was the confidence of people who believed the outcome had already been decided. Michael began by reviewing Robert's estate documents. The process was calm and professional. Several assets had already been placed into protected structures years earlier. Other holdings had clear instructions attached to them. With each document Michael reviewed, Brittany's expression became slightly tighter. The assumptions she had been operating under did not seem to match reality. Then Michael placed a sealed envelope on the table. I recognized Robert's handwriting immediately. My breath caught in my throat. "Your husband left specific instructions regarding this letter," Michael said. "He requested that it be shared only after all primary estate matters had been reviewed." The room fell silent. Michael opened the envelope and began reading. Robert's words filled the room. He wrote about family, about trust, about patience. He explained that wealth was never the most valuable thing he and I had built together. Character was. Loyalty was. Integrity was. Then the letter shifted. Robert described concerns he had quietly investigated during the final year of his life. He explained that multiple attempts had been made to gather information about family assets long before any need existed. He referenced documented inquiries, financial research, and repeated efforts to map the estate structure. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. Just a pattern he could no longer ignore. Jason's face grew pale. Brittany stared at the table. Neither interrupted. Neither spoke. Michael then presented the supporting records Robert had assembled. Dates. Notes. Correspondence. Timelines. Everything was organized with the same precision that had defined my husband's entire life. There was no accusation. There was only evidence. Evidence that certain conversations had not been motivated by concern alone. evidence that future inheritance had become a topic of unusual interest long before Robert's passing. Finally, Michael read the last paragraph. Helen, if you are hearing these words, then you already know why I asked you to trust actions rather than promises. I do not want revenge. I do not want conflict. I simply want the truth to stand where everyone can see it. Protect your peace. Protect your dignity. And remember that you never need to surrender what we built together in order to keep someone else's approval. When the reading ended, nobody spoke for several moments. The silence felt heavier than any argument ever could. Eventually, Jason lowered his eyes. Brittany remained motionless. For the first time since Robert's funeral, I saw uncertainty replace confidence. As we left the office, I realized something important. Robert's final victory had never been about money. The accounts were protected. The house was secure. The estate remained intact. But that was not the real lesson he left behind. His final gift was clarity. He had shown me the difference between people who valued me and people who valued access to what I owned. That evening I returned home alone. The sun was setting behind the trees outside the kitchen window. I placed Robert's final letter inside the drawer beside my chair and sat quietly for a long time. The future would not look exactly as I once imagined. Some relationships would never be the same. Yet for the first time in many weeks, I felt calm. Robert had seen the storm coming before I did. And because he cared enough to prepare for it, I was still standing when it finally passed.